What? Really? Did they really eat that? Hello. When we watch documentaries about people on the other side of the earth or about people living a long time ago, we often kind of wonder how could they eat the things they did. And while we are kind of making faces about what they ate, we are being told that what they are eating is seen as a delicacy. And then we will just be like, okay, you eat that. I'll just back away. And now our views about them being really strange people have been strengthened. But what is it that decides what we do and what we don't eat? Humans, of course, as all animals, have a strong drive to survive and to multiply and to progress. And basically we are prepared to go quite far to accomplish those things. If we hadn't had that, we probably would have stayed as hunter-gatherers so many thousands of years ago. Food-wise, we can talk about 4 different stages in history. The first humans were hunter-gatherers, and in a hunter-gatherer society, people are completely dependent on what already lives around them. Roots, nuts, seeds and other parts of different plants, but also clams, oysters and mushrooms were gathered. And different animals were fished and hunted for their meat and for other parts as well, but that we can come back to in another video. But the thing is, the people in a hunter-gatherer society don't control their environment, or at least not to the extent that the farmers later did. The biggest problem these people had with their food probably was the preservation of it. People living close to the sea probably had access to quite large amounts of salt, but in other places people probably had to rely on smoking and drying the foods. There are food historians who also think that they used fermentation as a way of preserving the food. That meant that they simply dug a hole, put the entire animal in the hole, covered it with dirt and let it lay there for a couple of months. Some believe that the salt levels in the animal's bloods are exactly right for the food to ferment instead of just rot. If you would like to try a bit of the fermented foods, there are things to try, and there are plenty of videos here on YouTube of people trying them out. Most of the time they are eating it the wrong way, so it's really horrible. The lightweight version of it is the Swedish Surströmming, and the heavyweight version of eating fermented food is the Icelandic Hákarl. And I'm sorry, Icelanders, for my pronunciation. Or the English name for it, Greenland shark. They could also use basking sharks for this. And here you can also see how it's spelled so that you can search for it if you want to watch more people try it and almost vomiting or actually vomiting. But these 2 dishes, the Hákarl and the Surströmming, says quite a lot about people's conditions of life so long ago. Frankly put, fussy eaters didn't survive, and things seen as delicacies today probably once were people's last survival strategies. Why else would we eat eyeballs and spiders and birds' nests? And then, about 10,000 years ago, a new idea was spreading. It had started a bit before that, but what now happened was truly revolutionary. What happened was the Neolithic Revolution that made farmers of more or less everyone. We had Paleolithic, that's the hunter-gatherer Stone Age, and Neolithic era, that's the farmer Stone Age. So, eventually, most people on the Eurasian continent grew cereal crops and kept domesticated animals. Compared to the farmer life, the hunter-gatherer life seems a bit more relaxed. The food getting for them didn't take as much time as it did later on when we became farmers. And the hunter-gatherers had more time for social interaction and cultural expression. But why then did people choose to become farmers? The farming life is much more efficient, and with that they could feed a lot more people on a much smaller piece of land. In a hunter-gatherer society, it's not possible to build a city, for instance. That amount of people crowded together wouldn't have been possible in the Paleolithic era. The crops the early farmers harvested and the animals they kept were pretty much the same as our food basics today. It was cereal crops and meat and milk from domesticated animals. With the domestication of animals, the farmers now had access to a completely new kind of food: the dairy products. Milk is a food source that has a really good payoff for the farmers. The animals could, by grazing the fields that couldn't be used for crops, still make use of that land. But the problem with milk is that it doesn't keep for very long. That's why we make cheese. Cheese can be stored for years. So, even if the crops would fail, the animals could still produce milk for the humans to make cheese from. So the first big change was the agricultural revolution. The second change was the creation of large trading organizations. It could be the Hansa in late medieval times, or the many East India companies from the 16th, 17th and 1800s. Of course, there had been trading before that too, but not that much. And the traded goods had been so expensive that only the wealthiest people could afford it. But the trading organizations, especially the East India companies, changed all that. This brought new flavors and new ways of preservation to the people. For the preservation, they now had two essentials: salt and sugar. Well, sugar still was very expensive, so they couldn't have that much of that. But being able to buy barrels of salt made a huge difference to what they could preserve and for how long. The longer you could store your food, the longer you could be sure not to starve when tougher times came. This resulted in people often actually preferring the slightly rotten or mouldy or rancid food. The new flavors that people now could experience were, as I earlier said, sugar, but also, as Northern Europeans could for the first time experience citrus and other fruits. Most of the time they couldn't taste them fresh though, since they had to travel quite a long way to get to us. Citrus fruits were sold dried and often served salted. The biggest thing though was all the new spices: cinnamon, saffron, nutmeg, ginger, pepper. That was all new things for us. But in these years, before the industrialization, life actually didn't change much. So, if we compare a family in the 1300s to a family in the early 1800s, their lives probably would seem quite similar. And just 50 to 100 years later, their lives had changed completely. The third food revelation was the industrialization. Starting in England in the 1700s and then in about 200 years spreading throughout most of the world, it changed everything. All of a sudden the world started shrinking. There also was a possibility now for people to buy things that in other times had been complete luxuries. For instance, people here where I live could now buy large amounts of wheat and rye flour, and sugar was no longer as expensive, and that meant jams and marmalades and things like that being much more common. All the really salty food of the pre-industrialized era could now be replaced with sweet stuff. And if we really think about it, we are still in this industrialized era. The era of the world shrinking and our food horizons being broadened. The exciting thing now is to see what comes next. What will the next food revolution be? I hope you learned something new today. See you soon, I hope. Bye!